There are stories that live in the silence between words, the kind that refuse to die even after the ink fades. Mine began on a wet November evening, when I received a letter addressed in handwriting I knew too well, the handwriting of a man who had been dead for 5 years. The envelope was cream-colored, sealed with wax, and bore a return address that didn't exist on any map. Hallowmere Post Office, Northumberland. Inside, one line written in black ink. It wasn't an accident. Come before they find the others. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I knew the loops of that T and the slant of that S. It was the writing of Professor Adrian Locke, my mentor, the man whose death had ended my career, and, some would say, my sanity. I arrived in Hallowmere 3 days later, beneath a low ceiling of clouds that pressed down on the town like a lid on a coffin. The train station was little more than a platform, half swallowed by fog.
No one met me.
The village itself sat on the edge of a black marsh, a scattering of crooked cottages and shuttered shops, their windows lit by the trembling glow of paraffin lamps. At the inn, the woman behind the counter gave me a strange look when I mentioned Professor Locke. "Locke?" she said softly. "You'd best not go digging up that name around here, sir." But by then I was already lost in it. Professor Locke had been an eccentric scholar of ancient texts, obsessed with a 16th-century diary known as the Hallowmere Codex. 5 years ago, during an excavation near the marsh, he drowned. His body was found caught in the reeds, face up, eyes open, as if watching something in the mist. They said it was an accident. I never believed it. That night, unable to sleep, I took the letter from my pocket again. The paper had a faint smell, something earthy, like moss and smoke. I turned it over in the lamplight and noticed faint impressions on the back, as if written atop another sheet. I shaded it gently with my pencil. A few words appeared. The church. Midnight. Bring the notebook. The church stood at the edge of the marsh, a skeletal ruin of stone and ivy. As I approached, the air grew colder, and the fog rolled thick as wool. Inside, the pews were rotten, the altar collapsed. But at the far end, in the candlelight of a flickering lantern, stood a figure. Dr. Vale. The voice was low, tremulous. It was Margaret Hale, Locke's former assistant, a woman I hadn't seen since the night he died. She held something in her hands, a stack of letters bound with a red ribbon. "They started coming 3 months ago," she whispered. "Every week. Each one from Adrian." She handed me the bundle. The paper was aged, yellowed, as though written years ago. But the ink was fresh. I read the first letter that night back at the inn. "To whoever finds this, they lied about what we discovered in the marsh. The codex is not a text but a key. Hallowmere is older than it seems. I fear I've awakened something that remembers." I read through the rest, each one darker than the last. They described dreams, whispers, shapes moving beneath the marsh water, and the sound of church bells tolling when no one was there. By the 5th letter, Locke wrote that he had buried the codex beneath the stone of the drowned chapel. But there was no drowned chapel in Hallowmere, or so I thought. The next morning, I visited the constable. He was a heavy man with gray whiskers and eyes that had seen too much. When I mentioned the letters, he shut the office door quietly. "Dr. Vale, I'd keep that to yourself," he said. "Folk round here don't take kindly to ghosts." But I pressed on. I asked about the drowned chapel. He stiffened. "It's under the marsh. Sank a century ago. They say the dead still ring the bell when the fog's too thick." He smiled, but it was the kind of smile meant to stop questions, not answer them. That night, the fog came early. I returned to the church ruins with a lantern and Margaret's letters. The marsh stretched before me, black water shimmering like oil. Somewhere, faintly, I heard it. The toll of a bell. The sound came from beneath the surface. I found an old rowboat tied near the reeds. The water was still. As I drifted forward, the fog swallowed everything. The bell rang again, closer now. Then, I saw it, the shadow of a roof just below the surface, the remains of the drowned chapel. The steeple rose like a black finger through the mist. I reached down, and my hand brushed something hard. A stone slab, carved with the words, "Cadormit non obliviscitor." He who sleeps does not forget. And there, wedged between the stones, was a small tin box. Inside, a notebook, half-rotted, filled with Adrian Locke's handwriting. I took it back to the inn. As I read, my pulse quickened. The final pages were written in a frantic scrawl. I thought the codex spoke of gods. It spoke of memory, of how places remember us. Hallowmere is not haunted by the dead. It is haunted by what it remembers. The marsh remembers everything buried in it. Then one final line, written shakily. If you read this, you will not leave Hallowmere. At that moment, I heard footsteps outside my door. When I opened it, no one was there. Only the damp smell of fog. But on the floor, another envelope. The same handwriting. The same wax seal. Inside, the marsh has taken her. Come to the church. Margaret. I ran through the rain, the path a blur beneath my lantern. The fog seemed alive, curling around me, whispering, tugging at my coat. At the church, the door stood open. Inside, the floorboards were wet, slick. A trail of water led to the altar, and on the stone steps, Margaret's scarf. From beneath the floor came the faint echo of that bell, slow, deliberate, and hollow. I don't remember much of what happened next, only that I tore up the boards and saw the earth beneath shifting, like something breathing. The air filled with the scent of peat and decay. And then, for an instant, I saw him, Adrian Locke, standing in the mist, pale and silent, holding out his hand as if asking me to join him. When I blinked, he was gone. Only the sound of the bell remained, fading beneath the earth. They found me 2 days later on the road to Alnwick, half-drowned and delirious. The constable said I'd fallen into the marsh. They never found Margaret's body. They burned the letters. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in from the sea, I can still smell the moss and smoke on that first envelope. And I still dream of Hallowmere, of the marsh that remembers.